This number. Now look, we're all jumping to get into action at Gardening Australia Live in Sydney with you. Be there and we'll all have a ball. And now let's go to Colin. And he's deeply involved in propagating Australian plants.
Where else but Australia could you find scenery like this in a domestic backyard? These magnificent caves can be found just south of Brisbane, and they serve to highlight the great diversity of Australian soils. Add to that the variation in climate across the country, and you gain an understanding as to why we have such a huge array of beautiful Australian native plants. One of the joys of growing Indigenous plants is in propagating new ones for yourself. There are a few gardeners who've been deterred from this, thinking that it's all too hard. But Merv Hodge, well-known native plant expert, is definitely not one of them. And take a look at this, though. What's that?
It's a beauty. That's Neofabricium myrtifolia.
In this garden alone, there are literally thousands of plants that he's propagated himself, and he's got a few good tips for us. Merv, what native plants can we grow from seed?
Quite a lot of them, Cole. There's plants in the Myrtaceae family, which includes the Melaleucas, Callistemons, Eucalypts, Kunzias, and of course there's Brachychitons, Grevilleas, Banksias, or even grass trees.
So for the simple old gardener like me, is there a rough rule of thumb as to the time you should sow the seed?
Well, it'll depend largely on the plant itself, particularly though some of them may damp off in the humid months, so you would avoid germinating those when they're going to be at that stage where they'll damp off easily. Many of them can be germinated in spring, some of them even in winter.
What do you think about treating seeds? You know, I hear native plants have to be burned or they have to be boiled or whatever to make them germinate. And that hasn't been your experience at all?
No, I'm sure there's a lot of sense in what people have done. There's been control tests and so on, but I'd have to admit that I've destroyed many plants by trying to, say, burn them or boil the seed or even soaking them in cold water overnight. Sturt pea, for instance, I soak them in cold water overnight and they just fall apart. So I just sow them straight on the top of the mix and I get pretty good germination.
You're telling me before you put them in the fridge, though. Does that help?
Yes, it does. First of all, for keeping the seed, I believe the seed will last longer by being kept under refrigeration, but it also keep the insects away from them. But as well as that, some seed that will come from those cold conditions out in the warm conditions, it may be a stimulant to start them germinating.
Yeah, the average gardener will probably get erratic germination, but does that matter?
Oh, I don't think for the average gardener. For the professional, yes, he likes to have as many come up as fast as possible and uniformly. But for the home gardener, I don't think it matters a great deal, whether it's 1 week or 3 weeks.
What about your seed raising mix? What sort of mix do you use for that?
I mainly use potting mix and perlite mix. Some of the new processed potting mix processed down to a peat stage, I use that mixed with perlite, equal parts of each, and I get very good results.
How deep should you sow the seed?
A lot of it depends on the size of the seed, but look, most of the seed that I do, I just sow on the surface and just gently water them, and they'll wash in enough to give the results.
What's this bog method you talk about?
Well, the bog method is standing a pot with your mix in a container of water, a saucer, and you just keep water in that saucer and you get a capillary attraction of the water seeping up through the mix just to the surface, and it's enough to get the plants germinating, and it keeps them nice and uniform without splashing them on the top.
The average gardener can't provide bottom heat, can they? So how important is that, and how do you get around it?
Well, you can get small units for the hobbyist, but failing that, you can use rather large plastic containers, and you won't get bottom heat, but you will get a nice humid condition. But it's advisable to leave it open slightly to have a little bit of air exchange.
And do you keep it out in the full sun or in a sheltered position?
I'd prefer not to keep it in full sun, because in summer especially the things will get cooked. You're better to put it in dappled light or shade, but not too dark.
So it's that easy to grow your own native plants from seed?
Oh, I think it is. There are the difficult ones, but many of them are very easy. Yeah.
So